everyone. Welcome to the Bible by the Week. We are in week 32 of our readings. Last week, we had a bit of a reprieve when we read about the deliverance of Hezekiah, who was one of the good kings of Judah, the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom of Israel had been conquered by the Assyrians, who at this time were the big power in the region. And the Assyrians were this incredibly cruel, vicious people, which is what made them so powerful. So Israel had basically been obliterated, and then you'll remember they were on the doorstep of Jerusalem, besieging Jerusalem, when God delivered his people because Hezekiah turned to God. And so he was a good king. Unfortunately, as it happened, the kings that followed him, not good at all, with one exception that we'll get to in a moment. But this week we read the prophet Nahum. He's called one of the minor prophets. Minor not meaning that he's unimportant. Minor just meaning that his scroll, his book, is relatively short compared to, say, Isaiah or Jeremiah, who are called major prophets because we have such long books from them. In Nahum, we actually have God's declaring impending judgment on Nineveh, which is the capital of Assyria. You might remember that Jonah had been sent to Nineveh earlier, and the people had repented of their wickedness, and so God didn't destroy them at that time. But now, as Assyria is the great power in the region, and they are just vicious and cruel, God, in his anger, even though he's slow to anger, Nahum says, he won't leave the guilty unpunished. He cares for those who trust in him and will rescue Judah from the Assyrians. But Nineveh he's going to destroy, Nahum says. In fact, it says the city is going to be conquered and plundered because of its idolatry and its violence. The way that Assyria destroyed Thebes, the great city in Greece, which happened in 663 BC, by the way, it itself, Nineveh, is going to be destroyed, the people taken captive, and it won't be rebuilt to be the great power that it was. We jump then into 2 Kings for a little touchstone historically, talking about Manasseh succeeding his father Hezekiah when Hezekiah died. But Manasseh restores idolatry and sheds innocent blood, and he's denounced by the prophets. After him, Amnon becomes king at the age of 22, also does evil, so by 24 he's killed. Then Josiah succeeds him, and we'll hear about Josiah a little bit later, but he does right. He was raised by a priest who had rescued him, so he repairs the temple of God, and when they're repairing the temple, they discover, and this is how much they had turned away from God, they discover a copy of the law of God, the Torah, the revealed knowledge of God in Deuteronomy and so on, and his will for them. And they had thought that they had completely lost it. So Josiah consults a prophetess named Huldah. We don't know much about her, but she's mentioned a couple times in the Old Testament. Unfortunately, she didn't leave a book that we've discovered yet, so that we know exactly what she said. But she too provides guidance for this young king, Josiah, and he renews the covenant with God, and he destroys the idol shrines. He even destroys the shrine at Bethel. You might remember Bethel, the house of God, where the true God had been worshipped, but it had become a place where idols were worshipped. So he desecrates it by burning bones, which was how you desecrated a place at Bethel, so that it wouldn't be used to worship these false gods. And he even celebrates the Passover. Unfortunately, he's allied with Assyria. And so when Pharaoh Necho comes up from Egypt in order to attack Assyria, and they are going to have this great battle. It's not mentioned in the scripture, but it's incredibly influential in Middle Eastern history, called the Battle of Carchemish. Josiah tries to stop Pharaoh Necho, but of course the Pharaoh in Egypt have much greater armies, and so Josiah is killed. And Jehoahaz succeeds, but he's an evil king too. He gets exiled to Egypt. Necho renames another royal heir, Jehoiakim, and puts him on the throne, but Jehoiakim also does evil. It turns out Josiah was the last of the God-fearing good kings of Judah. We get this story told again in Second Chronicles about how Josiah is 8 years old when he succeeds and how he does right before God and seeks God and purges Judah of idolatry. And we get this story of the things he'd done with a little more emphasis on the role of the Levites who help him know how to celebrate the Passover properly. But as I said, he unfortunately tries to stop the Pharaoh to help the Assyrians and is killed. And Jeremiah and all the people lament the death of Josiah, this last good king. Which leads us to Zephaniah, another of the prophets. Zephaniah is a great great grandson of Hezekiah, the good king, and he speaks during Josiah's reign about the end times, not just the end of Judah, but the end of the world, to kind of put it in context. We often think that the end of our nation would be the end of the world, but they are two different things. They would just be the end of the world for us. But he speaks about how Judah is going to be punished for its idolatry and its complacency, meaning not caring about the poor. And it's going to be plundered and exiled. And then he talks about the day of the Lord, which is Old Testament speak for Judgment Day, is what we call it. All nations are going to be consumed by God's wrath. And so those in Judah are going to have to shelter. We say shelter in place. And Zephaniah says shelter in humility, in righteousness. Take refuge in God, not trying to deceive yourself into thinking that you don't deserve it or that somehow your self-righteousness will protect you. He points to the cardinal directions and he predicts that in the west from Judah, the Philistines are going to be destroyed, and they were in fact in 620 by the Scythians. In the east, Moab and Ammon, which you might remember were tribes that were related to Israel and Judah, and yet they'd always been a thorn in the side. They're going to suffer not only for their idolatry, but also because they taunted the people of God. And in the south, Cush, which is the southern part of Egypt, is going to be destroyed, and in the north, Assyria too is itself going to be destroyed. In fact, Nineveh is going to be called a haunt for wild beasts. It's going to be completely abandoned and destroyed. But woe to Jerusalem, Zephaniah says, for oppressing the poor, for defiling itself with shameless idolatry and rebelling against the Lord. He doesn't just care about his own name. He cares about the poor. He's always on the side of the vulnerable, and he's righteous and he's faithful to us. So he's going to eventually consume the world in judgment, but there's this promise throughout the prophets that he's going to purify and save a remnant of the people, those who are meek and humble, who trust in his name. And then at the end, we're told that he will quiet them or comfort them with his love and rejoice over his people, over this righteous remnant. So then we started reading into Jeremiah. Jeremiah is called the weeping prophet, and it becomes obvious why. He literally weeps over what's going to happen, what God predicts for the people of Judah and Jerusalem. He is a priest during the reigns of Josiah through Zedekiah, these kings in Judah. We're told in the first chapter that God knew him before birth and called him to speak, because he's quite young when he's called from childhood to speak, but God will speak through him. And he's given a couple of visions. He's inspired to be awake to what's going on by a vision of an almond tree that's flowering early in the spring, be up before its season, and he needs to announce the invasion of Judah from the north, and he has a vision of a boiling pot of water that's poured in a southward direction. And he accuses the people in chapter 2 of Jerusalem, especially, of exchanging their glory for worthless idols, the living water of God for broken cisterns, and freedom for slavery. And he accuses them of disgracing themselves and crushing the innocent poor. He talks about Judah prostituting herself, which, of course, this was an image from Hosea, and it's used throughout the prophets. Unfaithfulness to God is described in terms of unfaithfulness to a husband, and not just unfaithfulness, but prostitution. And the people are told they need to turn back to the Lord, their faithful husband, and he will restore, here again, a remnant of his people through good shepherds. Um, Shepherds after his own heart, and he himself will dwell with them. And we're reminded of Jesus, of course, who calls himself the good shepherd, who lays down his life for the people who physically came and dwelt among us. In chapter 4, we're told that this besieging army will come from the north, and only repentance can avert disaster. And Jeremiah is in agony at the destruction of his people, even though the Lord promises not to destroy them completely. Still, it's going to be bad. Jerusalem's people, he announces, are deceitful, they're foolish, they're callous, they worship false gods, and they claim that God won't do anything about it, just because he, of course, is patient, slow to anger, as Nahum put it. But Jerusalem will be punished. Jeremiah tells them that no one listens to Jeremiah's warnings. But like the other prophets, he says, God's not impressed by your worship services. He's not impressed by your burnt offerings. And so this northern army's going to come. Get ready for it. He calls the people at the temple to reform their ways. But of course, people don't like to be told that they're wrong and that they need to reform, especially it seems to be working for them, right? And he tells the people that the way that God destroyed Shiloh, which we don't know the details, but it was completely destroyed, he's going to destroy Jerusalem. Unimaginable to the people. This was the capital city, the city of God, that God had put his name on, the city where God's temple was. And God just tells them, stop praying for these people. They're going to get what they deserve. Um, and he tells us that even that the people are burning child sacrifices at Ben Hinnom. Now, that is a valley outside of Jerusalem. In the New Testament, it's called Gehenna, the valley of Hinnom, and it actually becomes a phrase, a picture that is often translated hell in the New Testament, because it was the garbage dump at the time of Jesus. Because these child sacrifices had taken place there in the Old Testament, no one would live there. They wouldn't hold businesses there or anything. All it was fit for was burning their garbage. And so this everlasting flame and this stench and this uncleanness and this terrible history is an image of hell in the New Testament. Even in Jeremiah's time, it's called an open grave. And the people, he says, have neither sense nor have any kind of shame. And so they're doomed to perish. And Jeremiah cries out for his people and for comfort for himself, because he's told that they're going to be exiled. But God, again, he insists that they deserve it. Even though Jeremiah weeps with sympathy, he also distrusts his people. And I think some parents who have adult children who are wayward understand that you can feel both at the same time. You weep for the suffering of your children, and yet you can't trust them. And that's how God feels towards his people. In chapter 10, Jeremiah tells the people they shouldn't be afraid of the other nations. They should be afraid of God and of his justice. It's similar to what Jesus says when he says, don't be afraid of one who can destroy only the body, but be afraid of him who can destroy both the body and the soul in hell. People are worried about the other nations, but they're turning their back on God, who can actually save them. In chapter 11, Judah is cursed for its covenant disobedience, or at least the curses of the covenant, which they have broken, are announced. God does tell Jeremiah that he's going to avenge a plot by Jeremiah's own family to silence him, to kill him, because again, nobody wants to hear this message. That's part of why they're going to be destroyed. Chapter 12, Jeremiah complains of his ill treatment, and God warns him it's going to get worse. The closer this coming disaster looms, the worse they're going to treat the messenger. And we have that in our time. People who get fired for not giving their bosses the message that their boss wants to hear. Then in chapter 13, our last chapter for the week, two images stand out. One is that of a ruined belt, a ruined leather belt, which illustrates that that Judah is a ruined country. It doesn't serve the purpose for which it was set aside, and so it can't hold things together, we would say. And the second image is a full wineskin, and we might think a full wineskin is a good thing, which it might otherwise be, but remember that God's wrath is often described as being poured out on people in punishment. People drank wine out of bowls, not glasses as we do, and if you drank a whole bowl full of wine, you might well feel some wrath the next morning. Um, and and yet this is an image of God's punishment. And so the wineskins represent the storing up of God's wrath. By wrath, I don't mean rage, by the way. That's not what wrath means in the Bible. It means the rightful punishment that you deserve. God has been delaying punishing his people because of good kings like David and Hezekiah and Josiah, but he's only going to hold it so long before this punishment gets poured out on his people. So that was the end of our readings. Remain focused, though, on the fact that there are these glimmers of hope that point forward to the coming Messiah, the idea of good shepherds and a good shepherd who will dwell with his people, and a remnant that will be preserved through all things. Those are our readings for this week. Hang in there. You will get through this ominous time. The Lord bless your study.